Today on This Week in Space, it's our Apollo 8 holiday special with Apollo flight director Jerry Griffin. Join us.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 42, recorded December 16th, 2022 for December 23rd, Space Holiday Special. Hello, ho, 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 and welcome to another episode of This Week in Space, the Ho Ho Holiday in Space and Apollo 8 edition. I'm Rod Pyle, your ham-fisted editor-in-chief of Ad Astra magazine, and I'm joined by the unimpeachable Tarek Malik, editor-in-chief at space.com, who's wearing a hat today. How you doing, Hart?
Hello. I am all jingle and no bells today, Rod.
Really?
But I'm
Like
ready
this?
to talk space.
Okay, I got my out-of-tune jingle bells. That's what happens when you order your Christmas ornaments off Amazon. So we're here today with a happy holiday medley. We're going to talk primarily about the world-changing flight in 1968 of Apollo 8, which was special for a bunch of reasons that we're going to hear about, with our special guest, Jerry Griffin, who was a flight director on that and the other Apollo flights. So this is a real treat for us. Now, just so you understand, I had to pre-record Jerry because he's an important guy and he had important things to do. So he couldn't be with us here today on our record date. So I did a pre-record with him, which we're going to get to for a minute. But first, we have a space joke.
Woo! Is it a Christmas space joke? That'd be fun.
Well, of course, from listener Andrew Joyner. Hey, Tarek.
Yes, Rod.
Which of Santa's reindeer struck fear into the cold hearts of the dinosaurs?
Ooh, that's a hard one. Was it Dasher? I don't know. Please enlighten me.
Comet. Yeah.
Of course it was Comet.
Of course it was Comet. So as always, we're soliciting your best and worst space jokes. Give us your best shot at twist at twit.tv. That's TWIS at twit.tv. Each week we'll pick one or two of the best jokes. If I only got two good ones in a row, I'd pick two and read them on the air with credit to you. That's it. No fortune, just fame. So we're going to hold off the headlines, because we have some fun stuff coming up. So I just want to set up the flight of Apollo 8. Now, Tarek, I was alive then. You weren't. But it had been a long...
Rub it in, why don't you?
Well, I'm the one that's got all the age-related
I missed all that stuff. That stuff was amazing, you know? So.
Well, yeah, but soon you'll be able to hear somebody who was there talking about it. So we had heard in 1961, Kennedy saying, was it 61 or 62? 61, right?
61.
Kennedy's announcement, yeah, that we're going to the moon, end of the decade, two Americans will land on the moon and come back to Earth and so forth.
And do the other things.
And do the other things. Not because they are easy, but
because they are hard. So.
Yeah, there you go. So it was an incredible...
Is that a good impression, by the way?
No, it's horrible.
No?
I was waiting for the crickets cue, but that's okay. Not that hard. But it was an amazing time to be alive. And so we had the Mercury flights, we'd had the Gemini flights, then we had the terrible Apollo 1 fire and lost 3 American astronauts on the pad during a test which was quite a disaster. And it took upwards of 18 months to recover from that. Now, as it turns out, looking back at history, NASA actually kind of needed that time to try and get the lunar module finished and so forth. But here comes 1968, very tough year in the United States, a lot of civil unrest. We're still in Vietnam. There's civil rights marches going on, assassinations, just a lousy year. And in the middle of all this, NASA says, hey, we've decided to send Apollo to the moon a little earlier than we had planned. So we had one flight of Apollo 7, which was an Earth orbit on the smaller rocket, the Saturn 1B. Then out of the blue, and not just for us, the public, but for a lot of people at NASA as well, out of the blue, senior leadership says, we're going to fly to the moon with Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders as the crew, but we don't have a lunar module, so we're just going to orbit the moon. And this is a gutsy thing to do because you've got just this one engine on the back of the Apollo service module. And once you've let go of the top stage of the Saturn V, and you shoot out towards the moon, you got to have that engine to break into lunar orbit. And then you got to have that engine to thrust out of lunar orbit. Once you're in lunar orbit, if that engine doesn't refire, you stay in lunar orbit forever, essentially, until at some point you spiral down to the surface. So that would have been very bad. So this was quite a gutsy thing. And, Tarek and I were talking about this, and we thought, well, let's get somebody who actually experienced that. And of course, the big deal is that they were in orbit around the moon on Christmas Eve and did something very special. So rather than prattle on about that, let's go to our interview with Flight Director Jerry Griffin and former Flight Director Jerry Griffin, and let him tell the story. So, Jerry, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us today. This is a real honor and a pleasure for me. I have to go through your resume a little bit, if you don't mind. It took me 3 pages of scrolling on Wikipedia, but I talked to a lot of overachievers on this show, but I think this takes the cake. So, you came into NASA after time in the military as a flight controller on the Gemini program.
Correct.
Then you were a flight director for all the Apollo flights.
Right.
Which had to be pretty thrilling. Then you went to NASA headquarters, you brave man, as the assistant administrator for legislative affairs. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, a Texas A&M engineer working the Hill. Interesting story.
kind of a combination of being a diplomat and a circuit breaker, I guess.
Yep.
And you're deputy assistant administrator for spaceflight operations, and that was during the early part of the shuttle program. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Then deputy director for the Dryden Flight Research Center. Then deputy director for the Kennedy Space Center. Then director of the Johnson Space Center, and after that, various senior positions in private industry. What was it like going back to the Johnson Space Center after all those years?
Well, it was neat. For one thing, it was coming home to Texas. But what really made that interesting is I'd gone off to Washington, I'd gone to California, I'd gone to Kennedy, and blah blah. And so I had a slightly different perspective of NASA after all that, because I had worked with all the centers and my golly, what a great bunch of people and facilities all over the country. And so I think maybe when I was selected, when Chris Kraft retired, I think maybe I was selected because they knew I had this bigger view of the agency. And we were kind of rolling into a new era with the shuttle and space station. And also, it was nice coming home. I did it for 4 years. Not nearly as much fun as being a flight director and mission control for Apollo. He had to work the budget and the Congress and other centers and all of that. So it did have a slightly more political tone to it than just being in there in flight operations and getting it done. But it was fun. It was a great honor to run the center. It really was. But I have to say, the most fun job I ever had was being a flight director.
I'll bet. Well, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And since this is our Christmas show, though, I wanted to touch on the Gemini program, which is an amazing time. You guys are moving so fast and doing so much and being so agile at a time when this was all new. And the flight of Gemini 6 and 7 happened in the Christmas season. Can you describe, that was there's a little bit of ad hoc in that mission because you didn't have a choice. You had to make these last minute, very quick decisions that are hard to imagine in the context of today. But what was the spirit like in mission control while these poor guys were drifting for 2 weeks in space?
Yeah, that was an interesting time because we couldn't dock, but of course they did rendezvous and got the two of them together, 7 and 6, and station kept. And I can remember it had to be almost about this time because I remember Wally Schirra said, "Go Navy, beat Army," and so it had to be around the Army Navy game, and so. you're right. We were flying so often that in those missions, the Gemini missions, we had our head down all the time. We never got much of a chance to look up, and it had an effect on your sensing of the seasons and that kind of thing. The fact that we were doing it at Christmas as opposed to the middle of the summer, the inside of the mission control looked exactly the same, and no matter what time of year it was, and it seemed normal. Now, the other thing to this that's important is that we were all young, and it was kind of easy to go with the flow and just make it happen. Now, I had little kids that made it a little tougher. I was, when I was made, when I got into Gemini, I was 29 years old.
Oh.
And
Yeah.
I was one of the older guys in the room because we had kids right out of college. John Aaron, for instance, a very famous flight controller, was right out of a little college in western Oklahoma, and physics major, and came to us, and he was a key guy, and he was about 22, 23 during Gemini, and the room was full. The room was full of them, and
Making life or death decisions every flight.
oh yeah. Now we had guys like Kraft that were usually about 8 to 10 years older. Kranz was a year older than I was, but Glenn Lunny, who became a flight director in Gemini, was actually younger than I was. So my point is that it was this young crowd, and we kind of had the scarf thrown around our neck and said, by golly, the country's given us a chance to do this. Let's go do it.
So let's talk a little bit about Apollo 8, which is kind of why we're here. This was, for those of us who were old enough to know what was going on and remember it, it was really life-changing. And I think even for the general public at the time, it was such a big deal because 1968 had been such an awful year. We had assassinations, we had civil unrest, we still were mired in Vietnam, United States. And, at the very end of this year comes this incredible bright spot of this daring mission to go out and orbit the moon, not just fly past the moon, as had been discussed by the Soviets and us, but to orbit the moon and all that implied. So why don't you talk about what led up to that and the experience of being in mission control, especially at that moment, Christmas Eve?
Yeah, let me give you the punchline, Rod. We had people tell us, you saved 1968, because you're right. With all of the turbulence that was going on in Vietnam and campus unrest and civil rights movement, all of that was really disruptive to the country. And in a way, we had missed some of that because we had been in mission control flying these missions, getting ready. The mission right before it, Apollo 7, was the first manned mission after the fire of Apollo 1. And had not 7 been successful, it just orbited the Earth with the command and service module, same hardware make that we flew to the moon on 8. It would have been extremely difficult to keep the program going if 7 had failed. In fact, I don't think it would have survived it. If you had a fire and a failure back to back, it would have been. Well, that kind of sets the stage because we were really focused on 7. And unbeknownst to us, in the control center at least, there was a small group got put together while we were flying 7 to look at the feasibility of going to the moon on 8. And we didn't know anything about it. It was probably 8 or 10 people, kind of key people that in different areas, engineering, flight dynamics, all that kind of stuff. And I remember walking out of the mission control after 7 splashed down And I believe I was with Glenn Lunny, another flight director, walking out. And we got the word that, hey, they're talking about going to the moon on 8. And we said, really? We just finished 7. And so we got caught up pretty fast. And the next morning, everybody came in and we got briefed on it and what it would amount to, and the fact that we didn't have a lunar module that was capable of landing. So, and it wasn't ready even to be at the Cape. Why don't we, George Lowe was the leader of the program then, and he was the one that said, why don't we take 8 to the moon? Now, you talk about a gutsy call. That, I think, Apollo 8 was the gutsiest call made in the entire Mercury, Gemini, Apollo era.
And at that time, how much prep time did that give you from that decision?
Well, we flew in October on 7, and 2 months later we went to the moon on 8. So we didn't have much, and so but the more we looked at it and started training for it, it was clear that we probably could do it as long as the hardware worked. Now, that was a big question, too, because the Saturn V that launched 8 to the moon had never flown with a crew on it before. And this wasn't going to be a flyby of the moon, a free return kind of slingshot. This was going to be an orbital mission around the moon. And the test of the Saturn V right before Apollo 8 did not go well. They had an engine problem on the Saturn V, the second stage, and they had a problem with the restart on the third stage, which sent you to the moon. But the Marshall guys convinced the powers that be, the program manager primarily, George Lowe, that they knew what caused those issues, and they had a quick fix for them. And he trusted him and made the call, let's go. So all of a sudden, here we are going to the moon. And it was, in a way, I think all of us had kind of forgotten this is Christmas season. This is the time you should be home and putting decorations up on the house and getting the tree decorated. And none of us had any time to do that. We were simulating, and then if we weren't simulating, we were debriefing. If we weren't debriefing, we were getting ready for the next simulation. But it worked. And then the mission was a total success. Everything worked just fine. And we learned a lot about how tough it was going to be on the crew to go that far and stay that long. And they weren't there very long compared to what the landings were going to be. So it was a great mission. And the time that we did have to think about Christmas, as you know, came when they read from Genesis. And that was a touching moment for everybody on the ground, I think, the public, and I can tell you those of us in Mission Control. We had no idea they were going to do that. That was something they had planned on their own. I think probably they told Deke Slayton, who was the head of the whole Flight Crew Operations Division, or Directorate, it was called. And I think they would, if they were going to do that, they probably told Deke. But they did it, and you could have heard a pin drop in the control center. And I don't think too many people wanted to talk.
Well, let me go ahead and play that now.
Okay.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
That's pretty moving, and that must have been. You said you could hear a pin drop in Mission Control. I mean, what a surprise for your whole crew! Yeah. What a moment!
Yeah, there were most of the guys teared up. Some were just downright crying, but it was touching. It was kind of brought us back to reality, and we had worked on getting to the moon. We didn't get to land on 8, but it was significant that we got there. And we knew they were, 3-4 days away from getting back home. And they were isolated. And I think the Christmas thing just kind of heightened that. And them reading from Genesis, it just heightened that feeling of, here we are, and live in this moment right now, because it's going to be remembered for a long time. I think it was uplifting. It was really uplifting, and I think from there on, the mission was a little more fun. Had a little more. We knew we had to get them home yet, but they were doing well.
Well, and I remember as a young man listening to this, and of course the crew was Frank Borman, the commander, Jim Lovell as the command module pilot, and Bill Anders. Jim Lovell would have been the lunar module pilot had there been a lunar module, correct?
No, Bill Anders was the lunar module pilot. Yeah.
Okay, and I remember. You could kind of get a sense of the different character of these guys. Frank Borman was a little more taciturn. Anders was excitable, and Lovell, had this kind of wonderful sense of humor about him. And I remember when they came out from behind the moon.
It was after the firing that TEI, Trans-Earth Injection, was done on the backside that got him home. And when he came around the corner, Jim said, indeed, there is a Santa Claus. That was typical Lovell.
Well, and of the various moments you experienced during this flight, that firing of the one single engine that would get them home, since they had no lunar module, must have been, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a moment of relief, to say the least.
Oh, yeah. It was a moment of relief when they used it to slow down to get into lunar orbit.
Yeah.
We call that lunar orbit insertion, LOI, and that engine had to be used there. And it worked fine, but after 20 orbits later, we said, "I sure hope this thing works again," and it did. I'd forgotten about that, but Lovell came around the corner and said, "There is a Santa Claus."
So. This flight ends and you guys finally get a break and you get to go home. And I assume this is when you really start beginning to see and feel the public perception of this mission, which was, Apollo 7 was a big deal, but it wasn't the first flight to the moon, and people have been counting the years and are they going to make Kennedy's deadline and so forth. So there's that sense of relief, but also I think even for people who, from what I remember and have read since then, for people who weren't particularly interested or gung-ho about the space program, this really shook them to their core in a good way. I mean, and plus it's the end of the year, right? So what was that?
And it was the Christmas season and all of that. Yeah, no, you're exactly right, Ron. I think and it was a positive thing for the country after all this negative stuff that had gone on. Finally, we did something that was seen by the world as being a very positive result. So I think you're right, and it spurred us then on to we thought we could make Kennedy's go, and the next year, 1969, we flew 4 Saturn rockets with crews on top of them. 9, 10, 11, and 12 went to the moon twice.
Right.
And landed. Went once and just almost landed on 10. So we were really hitting our stride about that point. By the time we flew Apollo 12, and we were looking forward to those later vehicles with the rover and longer stay times and tougher landing sites and all that. But the stage was set with Apollo 8, I believe. And we didn't realize it, but we never thought about it much, to be honest with you. But for all intents and purposes, I think the space race was over right there. Yeah. I think the Soviets knew. They also had a problem in that region of time somewhere in there where they had a big accident on their launch pad and not only wiped the vehicle out, wiped the launch pad out. So it was kind of saying, okay, guys, we're going to do this. We're going to beat the Soviets. And like I say, we never talked about that much because we didn't have time. We figured we better play our downs the way we wanted to call them and don't worry about them too much, what they were going to try to run. And I think the country stayed with us better than through Apollo 11 to get that first landing.
So then, just as kind of a bookend of the program, I mean, we could talk about the flight of the other Apollos, including 11, all day long, and I'd love to someday. But let's jump to Apollo 17, which also took place in the holiday season, and with the cancellations of 18, 19, and 20, became sort of the bookend for the program. It's not remembered as a Christmas flight, but I would imagine there was some emotion when that mission ended. And once again, you're going home to Christmas season, but in a very different tone, kind of a mix, I would guess, of triumph and a little bit of sentimentality.
Yep. I think there was, and it varied person to person. I'll tell you a funny story that on Apollo 17, the mission at the moon was complete. They came back up, rendezvoused with the command module, the mothership. They did trans-Earth injection, worked just fine. They're coasting home. In those coast periods, when you're between the moon and the Earth, both either way, it gets pretty quiet sometimes. And it's a good time for the crew to get some rest. They could all sleep at once, and we could watch systems for them and wake them up if we had to. We didn't have to have one of them up all the time. And so it happened about halfway home from the moon on 17. I was flight director, and the guys tended, sometimes when it was quiet, 2 or 3 would come up around my console, the flight director console, and just kind of talk things over, not on the air to ground or not on the comm loops, just talking air talk with each other. And this particular time, almost everybody in the room came up around my console. And I think there was a little bit of, it's about done. It's about over. And some guys, you could tell were, as you say, a little bit sentimental about it ending. And me being one of the older guys, at 37 or something by then.
Seemed old at the time.
I remember I said, well, guys, maybe it's not so bad after all. I said, maybe it is time to end this phase of what we're doing. Because I said, I think in 20 years we'll be on Mars. And that shows you what kind of prognosticator I am, because that would have been 1992. And we didn't quite make that.
No.
But I was convinced, and I think all of us were, that this is going to go on. We're going to keep the momentum. We're going to keep it going. And thank goodness, now, 50 years later, I was only off 30 years or so. 30 years later, we're ready to go back to the moon, or getting ready. And Artemis 1 was a great accomplishment. I think it looked like to me it was right on the money all the way. And so I think we're aimed in the right direction, even it's later than Jerry Griffin predicted in 1972. And so I think, all of this, everybody, one of the things I keep telling the people that, it's a tough business. It's not easy. It's not easy to get it funded, not easy to get it built, tested, flown. And it's just a hard business. It's a hard business.
Mm.
But Kennedy had it right. We do it because it's hard. And we don't do it because it's easy. And that has paid off, I think, for the country. I just hope we keep the momentum now that we've got started to get back to the moon with Artemis. I can tell you that people are ready. I've stayed close to the program. I don't live in Houston anymore, but I'm about 4 hours away, and I get down there quite often. In fact, I'm going to be there day after tomorrow, and talking to them, and they're ready. They've got that look in their eye, just like we did. They think they can do it, and by golly, by the way, they're a little bit older. The average age, and that's probably not all bad.
Yeah.
But those young guys in Apollo really were fantastic. Gosh, they were good. And so I think we're on the right track. And Apollo, after we land somebody on the moon with Artemis, Apollo, I think, will be put in more of a perspective of historic significance, but it'll not be the current game, which is fine. It's time to pass that torch and let the youngsters have a crack at it and see how well they can do.
The youngsters who aren't nearly as young as you were, but we've all aged, so that's a good place to close it. I thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a real treat, and I hope you have a Merry Christmas and a great holiday.
Well, same to you, and I want to know when your next book is coming out, because I read them like Bibles, of course, as you know.
Oh, and, thank you so much.
So I'm ready.
Okay, well.
Yeah, send an autographed copy.
I'm absolutely, and I'm going to put that on the cover of the next one. This book will be read by Jerry Griffin.
There you go.
Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
And we are back. So, Tarek, you got any thoughts on Apollo 8?
Well, to me, and I again, this is a generational thing. To me, I read about Apollo 8, and I saw, of course, the Earthrise photos that the crew took and how iconic that was. But my first exposure to it, like in person, was just through historical films and reading it in books and stuff like that. And the fact that it happened at Christmas at that point in time was lost on me until much, much later. I think until I was like in college, and I was able to read a little bit more on my own. And I had read, I think it was Lost Moon. I don't think it's called Lost Moon anymore, Jim Lovell's book. I think it's just called Apollo 13, where he talks about going on that flight.
You're right.
Way back when. And then I went back and watched the recordings that were then like these tiny little postage stamps on the internet back then. And it wasn't it was, and there wasn't a space station back then. I mean, this is like the early 90s. Like we didn't have like a permanent crew on the space station. And I thought how strange that was that there was this time where these astronauts had Christmas at the moon, and what that must have been like. And is that a template for the future? Of course, I thought we were going to be back on the moon, in like 98 or whatever it was back then. So it didn't register for me that it was going to take much longer to see that kind of an event at the moon in the future. And we're still not there yet, right? We haven't had it.
Yeah. I was about to blurt out 50 years, and I thought, no, actually, it's going to be more like 55. But
yeah, it's going to be more. It's going to be more.
We're headed that way, and Jerry's prediction that we'd be on Mars in the early 90s didn't quite pull off either. But
to your point, it does. The audacity of the flight, when I was finally reading into the history, really resonated with me, because they have this Saturn V rocket. I almost said Falcon 5 rocket. That's a whole other SpaceX lost rocket story. But they had this Saturn V rocket, and it's designed to go to the moon. So why not send it to the moon and send astronauts there in a year, like you mentioned, very difficult year. And this kind of capped it, and did something truly amazing that had never been done before.
And we got that incredible first Earthrise photo out of this flight.
Exactly. Some perspective, such a moment. Right?
But again, I remind all you youngsters out there that photo had to come back in a film magazine off a Hasselblad camera, because we didn't have high-res video then. So the only video, we had this kind of low-res, grainy stuff coming from the command module, but with a TV camera that was about the size of a shoebox. But the actual pictures that came back, these incredible pictures, look a lot like the stuff that has just come down from the Artemis 1 mission, was all sent back 2.25 by 2.25 film. And imagine being the person that had to process that film. Don't make a mistake, because it's the only one there is.
I was going to bring up Artemis 1 because I think that there was a lot of echoes of Apollo 8 there, because there's a lot of parallels, right? This is the first Orion crew capable spacecraft, no one on board, but like it had something like a dozen plus cameras all over it, inside, on the exterior, on the solar arrays, which Apollo didn't have. It didn't have these boom mounted cameras to take a look at everything from every different angle, and the imagery that we saw. It was just amazing. And I think that you got the sense that the folks at NASA were seeing it too, that they were thinking, the next time we're going to see these views, there's going to be people behind the camera, like there was in Apollo 8, where they're swinging around the moon and seeing it with human eyes for the first time. And that first is going to come, with the lunar South Pole, with the new orbits they're going to do that are going to be different from Apollo. So we'll see. Now Artemis 2 not going to go into orbit around the moon like Apollo 8 did. Just going to do that free return flyby. But at least we're going to get kind of a step back to what was first achieved in 68 with a 21st century space capsule and 21st century astronauts.
And as indicated by the flyby, which we're doing, as I understand it, because of an underpowered upper stage. I won't go on my rant about that. But also Jerry talked about Apollo 17, which was the wind down from all this. And as most listeners know, we were supposed to have Apollo 18, Apollo 19, Apollo 20. Those didn't fly because of budget cuts. So 17 was the end of it. And again, as Jerry was talking about, it was kind of a different mood, of course, than Apollo 8 was, which is the beginning of it. So a couple of years later, around Christmas season, Apollo 17 wraps up the program. What always rankled me about that the most, I guess, besides, of course, as a young man wanting to see the Apollo program continue, perhaps perpetually, was that we knew they had built the hardware already. And it was sitting around the Cape, not being used. And now it's in museums, and it's great to have, real flight hardware you can go look at. But it's a little irksome that, it was those missions were pulled for want of the funds just to operate them. The hardware was built. The lunar modules were built. The command modules were built. The Saturn V's were built. All you had to do was put in people, fill them up with gas, and off you go. And of course, I'm oversimplifying it. There's a lot more that went into running one of those missions, but it just didn't feel right. But
it's kind of like a bittersweet Christmas. So you've got these two different Christmases, right? That are what, about 6 years apart. If I'm doing my math right, maybe I'm not. I think I am. No, 4 years apart. 4 years. Yeah, so that's why I'm not.
And that's ladies and gentlemen, why Tarek and Rod are in the media.
That's why my sister is the engineer and not me.
Yeah.
But you have this one amazing, Christmas where you've got Christmas Eve, like Jerry had mentioned, with the reading of Genesis from the moon, and then you have this next Christmas where it's all over. Just less than half a decade, from when it began, and it is a bit sad to think that all happened in that same space. What is that? About a third of the time it took to build the SLS rocket, for Artemis.
Oh yeah.
I'm not trying to give it a hard time. I'm just trying to put that into perspective.
No, go ahead and give it a hard time. It took way too long.
We can't now, Rod. It worked perfectly, so we can't give it a hard time anymore. I believe it when I see it. And, I've said this many times, and I didn't believe that SpaceX would be able to land rockets and reuse them. And then they do that all the time now. I didn't think that SLS was going to fly. Now I owe my whole staff Girl Scout cookies, and so it's just amazing how much was done in a short period. Now, of course, NASA had 4% of the national budget back then. In order to pursue that stuff, it does not have that now. But it's got
a tenth of that.
Yeah,
that's a big difference. Yeah,
but we should point out that it's not been for nothing. It's been 20 plus years that there has always been astronauts and their cosmonaut and other international colleagues celebrating Christmas in space. I know we're going to talk a little bit on that too with the International Space Station, and that continuous presence. I don't expect it's going to stop. We might have some gaps after the space station is retired there, but it seems like we're on the cusp of a lot more Christmases in a lot more different places if the trend is going to continue over time.
Well, hey, I hear something. I think we have a special guest coming on. I do believe it's my good friend Carlton Johnson, who is calling us from the North Pole, where he belongs. Carlton, can you hear me?
Ho, ho, ho. I hear you've been a bad elf.
Oh, you don't know the half of it. So for the rest of you, my pal Carlton is a retired colonel from the Air Force. He is friendly with some of his pals at NORAD, and I wanted to get him on to talk about NORAD tracking Santa. And as it happens, by the way, Carlton is also the chairman of the board of governors of the National Space Society, the group which publishes Ad Astra magazine, which I edit, and does lots and lots of other things. So, Carlton, I know you've been working on that top secret project for years, and I'll understand if you can only talk about it obliquely. I think it's called Operation SLAY, which if I remember properly, stands for Suborbital Lift Enabling Global Happiness. Do I have that
right? There you go. See, you've done your homework. Now you've gone from coal to SLS. I'll go ahead and give you an SLS in your pocket.
Oh, that's way better than the rotten apple that I was expecting. So can you talk a little bit about, NORAD's been doing this thing for a number of years where they, metaphorically track Santa and kids all over the world can go onto the website and watch. And I did a couple of times. It's really, really cute. Do you know much about the history of that?
Oh, yeah. And for way of background for everybody on the call, I spent a number of years in what used to be called Air Force Space Command, and it's as now transitioned into Space Force. And many years ago, prior to all that creation, you had the Continental Air Defense Command, which eventually became known as NORAD. And there was a gentleman, really cool colonel. His name, excuse me, it was a cough. His name was Colonel Harry Shroot. And Harry had the unique opportunity to have two types of phones in his house. One was a red phone, and let's just call that the bat phone. And if something bad happened, he'd pick that up, talk to a 4-star general, and say, we have a problem. We need to do something. And only the 4-star had that number. But unbeknownst to Harry, what happened was, and this is, by the way, back in, I believe, 1955, 56 or so, the Colorado Spring newspaper accidentally misprinted that number into the newspaper. And so Harry goes in and he gets the call on the red phone, and there's this tiny little voice that comes up and says,
Aw.
"Is this Santa Claus?" Now you gotta remember, this is classified network and everything else. Nobody's supposed
Right.
to
This
have
is
this number.
DEFCON 1 phone, right?
Yeah, and he's like, "What?" And the kid said, "Is this Santa Claus?" And Harry thought it was a joke, that somebody's putting him up for a joke. And then he realized that when the kid started crying,
no.
it wasn't a joke. And so he just started talking to the child and say, "Hey, have you been a good boy?" and everything else, and asked to speak to the child's mom. And then he found out that it literally was a mistake, but the cat was out of the bag. And so the command center starts getting all these phone calls for Santa. And the airmen, being cool airmen as they do, or as they are, they posted onto the board at the time as they tracked things on the wall. They posted Santa's sleigh and started tracking Santa. And ever since then, Santa has been tracked. And just so you know, as he's flying around on occasion, depending on where he's going, he has carte blanche to go to any airspace. When he goes to the certain airspace locations, the F-22s and F-35s will give him an escort. But because of this hypersonic thing that he's got on his sleigh, it's a little hard to keep up with him. But Santa is out there, and he's being tracked by NORAD, and thanks to Colonel Shroop.
Wow.
Colonel, I would be very interested to learn how he gets tracked now. I mean, is it mostly just ground-based radar that we would use for normal airplanes, or we're all about space here, Rod and I, and I would imagine that you could track him through space as well. How does that work?
I gotta tell you, so Santa's a special case. See, unlike how the normal tracking goes with ground-based radars, you're talking about space-based radar. Santa's sleigh is a little bit part Batman mobile, part space above beyond hypersonic stuff. It's all classified stuff. Like, we'd have to take away your presents for the year to tell you all about it. But the short version is, as Santa's going around, he pops up every now and then just so we can see him. He goes from stealth to show. And Rudolph does his little bleep, and he gives us a ping. It's kind of like, this is an Air Force thing. I'll kind of throw this out to Navy guys. When you're on a boat in the Navy, bless their hearts, I love my brothers and sisters in the Navy. They call a surface ship a ship. Anything that goes under the water, a boat. I don't even know where it came from. It's a Navy thing. But when you're in a boat and you want to do one ping, if you will, to see if there's another boat around, you do this little radar, bing, and then all of a sudden you see what's around you. Well, Rudolph does the same thing. And so as Rudolph is up there,
the red nose, I got it. Okay.
There you go. And he'll go, and there's Santa right there. Rudolph just gave us a ping, one ping only. We're good.
One ping
only. It's very classified, but just like I said, it works. It works. Trust me, guys.
So speaking of classified, you've got this guy flying around in orbit, presumably. I haven't figured out yet how he does the reentry thing, but you kind of explained it with the Batmobile deal. But how do you know? How do you know that this isn't some false flag operation packing nuclear heat in those bags of packages? I mean, what if? How do you figure that out when he's headed our way?
Dude, first of all, we're talking Santa Claus, all right? We're talking the jolly old elf himself. Now, Santa Claus sleigh with his 8 tiny reindeer plus Rudolph can outrun anything. anything. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen a cat that have like anything. He can run on anything. And as a result, when he pops up, we know because there's this really cool thing called IFF, identification, friend, or foe. In this case, it's IFFS-S, identification, friend, or foe / Santa. And so when Santa's going around, the elves will get him ready. He'll get all the nice gifts in the back of the vehicle, as the Army likes to say. And then he starts his startups, the startup process, kind of like Batman used to do, turbines to full, everything else, Robin go Roger. Well, it's just like that. And he'll flick all these switches and so forth, and then he'll go IFF/S. And as soon as that comes on, we'll get the IFF signature. NORAD now tracks that, and everywhere he goes, we know that it's Santa. Now, somebody tries to spoof that. There's this really cool stuff called crypto, not to be associated with what you've heard in the news recently. None of that stuff, none of those guys. We're talking the real crypto that secures communications between ground, space, and in this case, the sleigh. And so it's all encrypted. And only we and Santa have the encryption. And because Mrs. Claus knows what she's doing, guys, just so you know, behind every great jolly old elf, there's a better woman who keeps them straight. We get the codes from her every year at a certain time in a certain way with a certain system, along with her cookies, and we're good. So, dude, I'm just telling you, Santa's got the coolest operation, and nobody on the planet could beat it.
So it sounds like he's got his own mission control down there, up there at the pole.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Oh, guys, you got to see it. I mean, so I was just, down the street a little bit. I had to go outside the secure area because it's the worst thing on the planet to get beat on the head with a candy cane by an elf. I'm just telling you, you don't want to ever go through that. These guys are like, they're supposed to be all nice and funny and, oh, yeah, we love you. Yeah, don't mess with the elf. If you've ever seen Lord of the Rings and Legolas, that's what Santa has for security forces, guys. I'm just saying. So as you go over to that area and you get from where I'm standing right now, which is outside the fence area, well, it's kind of all lit up. You can see it, but it's got this. Anyway, as you walk in, you go into mission control, or in this case, Santa control, and you have rows and rows and rows of elves and things, and they have these big screens on the wall, and they show where all the children are, where Santa's going to deliver his stuff, and it shows. This is the coolest thing. It has the naughty or nice thing: green for nice, red for naughty. Rod, I'm just saying, you need to up your game just a little bit. I'm just saying.
Like you're the first person that's told me that. Yeah.
I'm just saying. And then as you go around, you have the communication section, you have the encryption section, you have the radar tracking section, you have the gingerbread making station. It's all right there. It's the fabulous operation.
Well, and that operation, should you want to check out more about this, is at www.noradsanta.org, or just type noradsanta.org. That's NORADSANTA.org into your browser, and you will get there. Colonel, you have a great holiday. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your work for the National Space Society.
Can I say one more thing?
And say hi to the fat man in red for us. Of course, you can say whatever you like.
All right, one more thing. So this is a call out, and so there's some of you out there who may think that Santa's not real. I got you. I understand. Everybody's got to have their opportunity to excel. I have personally met the man. I was serving in Iraq. I was serving our country doing what we're asked to do, and we had a really bad time. There's some things that were just happening, and all of a sudden, I hear this jingle, 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 and I go outside, and amongst this parade of people was Santa in a sleigh. Now, in this case, he had a serious contingent and convoy protecting him, but he looked dead at me, threw me an MRE, which is something I really wanted for Christmas, And he said, "Don't worry, I got your back tonight." And I went back. To my hooch and I checked on the radar to see if he was there. Lord help me if he wasn't there in Baghdad at that moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, Santa Claus is real. He is out there. Be nice, not naughty. Don't be like Rod. And make sure you go on to the NORAD tracker to see him because he's coming to a town near you soon.
Thank you very much, sir. You have a lovely holiday, and I will see you on the flip side.
All right. See you soon. Hey, yo, stop. Hey, oh, Rod, I gotta go. I just said I was told that I did something wrong, and the elf is trying to pull me into the office, so I gotta go get beaten by the elf.
No.
Talk to you later.
Oh,
Thank you.
Up to his armpits and elves with fangs. All right. Thank you very much.
Elf.
All righty. Well, I'm glad we got that out of the way because I was concerned that we weren't going to have NORAD Santa this year because of everything that's going on, but we are there. Now, before we go, we have some questions from a listener, Tarek.
Oh, yes. I'm
We
ready.
have a listener.
I'm ready for that. It's like Christmas miracle.
Yeah. Norm Fazakis he gave us 3 questions. If, and this is a big if, he says, Apollo 17 hadn't been the last moon mission, where would we be today? Or even if we had continued the Apollo flights, would the cost have been so intolerable it would have been canceled sooner or later? So let's take our turns answering this. Mine is Watch For All Mankind on Apple TV. Because that's kind of, there's some other little differences. The Soviets got to the moon first and all that. But that's one alternative history run out. My take on it is that we would have probably gone through Apollo 20. And I think politics being what they were and the nature of the country and the world and so forth at the time, we would probably still have done what we did because I think the shuttle was kind of inevitable. That said, there were a lot of plans on paper, many missions flown in file cabinets to repurpose Apollo hardware. Apollo hardware is very purpose-built to do the moon landings, and that was kind of what it was good at. And while the command module and the service module were pretty robust, the lunar module was a very lightweight machine and really purposed for that. However, there were plans for Apollo with or without, but probably with a Saturn S4B stage or some kind of module anyway, to fly a flyby loop around Venus or Mars or both, which would have put those guys out there in a not very well shielded spacecraft for upwards of a year to 2 years. So that was probably ultimately not going to happen. And a lot of follow-on missions on the lunar surface, including long-term lunar module habitat, a roving lunar module, and a lot of other stuff. So we could have conceivably done a lot more with that hardware had they continued that part of the program.
Yeah, and I would contend that, like, with cost being the big reason why everything was canceled, if it hadn't been the last moon mission, I would assume that cost would have been like, all right, yeah, we'll keep paying for it. And that they had plans for a wheel space station, they had plans for fully reusable space shuttles at that point in time. And if that, if we just mentioned it earlier, if that commitment to the expense of space for the drive for the country, had gone through, I think that we would have ended up, getting to Mars when they thought that they would get to Mars, because the drive would have been there. Whether or not the competition was there, I think that's an open question. That's what really spurred everything. But in my my headcanon, that's what would have happened. We would have gotten all the way there, done all the great things. I would like to see people studying Venus from orbit, if not walking on super high pressurized spacesuits and stuff. That'd be really cool. I think Venus needs more attention, but I would say Mars for sure, personally.
Venus is a forlorn trailer park, but whatever you say. All right, next question. This is 2 of 3. Is it true the Skylab could have been saved if the space shuttle development schedule had kept on its original timing and boosted it to a higher orbit? Short of another Apollo launch, could anything else have saved it? My recollection is that, yes, that was the plan. And 2 things conspired to make the shuttle not able to accomplish that. One was that, of course, it was late in development because, hey, cost plus contracts, aerospace contractors, that kind of thing. But also, it might have worked even despite that. But the solar activity cycle spiked higher and sooner than expected in that span of a few years in the late 70s. And that created extra atmospheric drag because the solar activity caused the Earth's atmosphere to expand. And so it began moving towards a deorbit status much sooner than they had planned. You got anything else to say on that?
Yeah, no, it's just one of those really kind of tragedies of timing when it comes to the spacecraft. And then the sad thing is, there were other rockets. I think that if they had really wanted to, they probably could have found some way to do something. It's just a matter of having the rockets to do it. And we should point out that they used one of the Saturn 1Bs, right? Am I correct, for first Soyuz Apollo, which was an international effort. And had they not used that, that could have been a vehicle that they could have used to get up there as well. So it's kind of one of the things where we just don't know what would have happened if they could. I think now NASA would probably rack its suppliers to try to find someone with a rocket that they could send up there to do something. But it wasn't as flexible as it was back then, or it wasn't as flexible then as it is now.
Yeah,
the options that they had available.
Well, and you just inadvertently gave me the perfect segue, because Norm's last question is, how crazy is the launch of 2 SpaceX rockets within a couple of hours of each other on 12/16? Did that happen?
It didn't. They got close, but they SpaceX had to rejigger the schedule because they also had to launch NASA's Surface Water Orbiter mission, SWAT.
Oh, the SWAT. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they did push things out a bit. But I take the point. I mean, SpaceX is getting close with launching rockets. Cheek to cheek, if you will, for lack of a better saying. It's getting pretty crowded. Well, so
he continued the question to say, is SpaceX trying this to test how things will be when Starship is launching on the regular? Seems nuts to do it that quick otherwise, but these were from 2 different launch sites, right?
Well, no, they were going to be launching from Florida too, because the SWAT mission launched from Vandenberg, and then they had 2 more missions to launch from Florida, one from the Kennedy pad, one from the Cape Canaveral pad. So basically, if everything had gone right, they would have used every one of their available pads for non-test missions, because they've got, of course, the Starship stuff in South Texas. They're not doing it on purpose. That's just when their windows are, when they get the ranges and everything. But SpaceX is very, very kind of flexible, and they change things at the last minute. In fact, they changed the SWAT launch. They delayed it because they had to do some extra inspections, and then that had a bit of a ripple effect. And they have a commercial partner for SES for the other launch on the 15th, and they decided to go for that one and push their own Starlink launch out, which is why you saw it get a bit spread out more. However, SpaceX has already shattered its record in 2022 for how many launches. I think they're pushing 50, and if all it goes well, they're setting new records for rocket reuse, because one of the ones on the 15th was the 15th flight for that mission, a new high for Falcon 9s. So
this is my Christmas present: is these guys showing the world what can be done. Regardless of what Musk is doing with Twitter and everything else. I mean, he's really turned in some odd directions lately. But the machine he built with a lot of help from a lot of very talented people at SpaceX is just. It's doing what would have been unthinkable even 10 years ago. It's incredible. Yeah.
And I like I said earlier, I was of the, I'll believe it when I see it. And I have to admit, I did not believe it when that company said they were going to do reusable stuff, and this thing was going to come back and it was going to land on a landing pad. That we've seen it though. It's regular now. I mean, I was given speeches 10 years ago where I was like, well, yeah, they keep exploding when they land, which is sad. and yet now here they are launching them 15 times. And this rocket, the Falcon 9 Block 5 first stage, was designed for 10 reuses, and now they're pushing 15. Elon has, said there really isn't an upper limit. They're just going to keep trying to see what they can do. And it's a new normal. And you see a lot of new companies and older companies even taking at least 1 or 2 reusable pages from that book for their new vehicles. And when Starship does come up, to your point, Norm, they're going to have to be really, really comfortable with reuse, to the point of where we see at the airport, with United or Southwest, where they're flying over and over again. They want to land this thing at the launch pad again, with the booster, and catch it with those giant chopsticks, and then just gas it up again and go. So the more experience they rack up, I think, the easier it'll be to use that to learn from the new vehicles they want to go. But there's still a lot of challenges. We still got to get Starship to orbit, and then to the moon, because NASA wants to use it too. And so I think 2023 is going to be a very interesting year for Starship, because either they get to orbit or they get to the moon for some test stuff for NASA, and then they get ready for those crewed flights.
Well, and 2023 isn't very far away. And Norm, thanks for those questions. And anybody, feel free to send them in. If you've got questions for us, we'll try to make time every couple of episodes to answer them. And hey, what's that? Those are jingle bells. That means it's time to wish everybody a happy holiday. Thanks for joining us today. Tarek, where can people find you under the mistletoe?
Well, they can find me enjoying the 1-year anniversary of the James Webb Space Telescope, because that launched on Christmas 2021, and here we are again. But I'll be doing that on Twitter at Tarek J. Malik, and then they'll find me eating some tamales with my family, which is a tradition that we do every year, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, it's an interesting Christmas tradition. All right. And of course, you can peek at me at pilebooks.com or at astromagazine.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and occasionally Instagram as well. Don't forget to drop us a line at twis@twit.tv. That's TWIS at twit.tv. As noted, we welcome your comments, suggestions, and ideas, and we love getting your feedback. New episodes published every Friday on your favorite podcatcher, so make sure to subscribe and tell your friends and give us reviews. Please give us reviews. Please subscribe. 5 stars, thumbs up, 5 happy faces, whatever they use. We love it all. You can also head to our website at twit.tv/TWIS. And don't forget, you can get all the great programming on the Twit Network ad-free on Club Twit. It makes a great Christmas gift, as well as some extras that are only available there. And I'm not going to tell you what they are unless you go. It's just $7 a month, which is about the cost of a single serving of IHOP's holiday special milk and cookies pancakes, and a lot healthier. So I'd go for Club Twit. You can also follow the Twit Tech Podcast Network at Twit on Twitter and on Facebook, and twit.tv on Instagram. Have a fabulous, happy holiday, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Hey folks, I'm Ant Pruitt, and what do you get your favorite tech geek that has everything? A Club Twit gift subscription, of course. Twit podcasts keep them informed and entertained with the most relevant tech news podcasts available. With a Club Twit subscription, they get access to all of our podcasts ad-free. They also get access to our members-only Discord, access to exclusive outtakes, behind the scenes, and special content such as AMAs, which I just love hosting. Plus, exclusive shows such as Hands on Mac, Hands on Windows, and the Untitled Linux Show. Purchase your geek's gift at twit.tv/clubtwit, and it will thank you every day.